get the best evidence from them. They'll tell you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming two men who need no introduction, the World Bank's President Jim Kim and Alibaba's Jack Ma.
Jack, you go first. No.
Good to see you again. Great shirt.
Nice
Great shirt.
Oh, right here, okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Jack, have a seat. Jack, I think they're not here for me.
No.
Well, thanks.
We all come here for you.
No. Thanks for coming. And thank you, everybody, for coming to what I think is going to be an extremely important discussion for so many reasons. But here's why I keep referring to Jack. We met 6 years ago. It was the first few months of taking over. And Alibaba was big, but it wasn't huge like it is right now. You were not a household word throughout the world. But then I began to ask my own team, if the Alibaba model is the path forward in development, are we building the right things in developing countries? And you've heard me say this. 25, 30 years ago, we had a debate in the World Bank about whether we should invest in telephone poles in India. And luckily, we didn't invest in telephone poles in India. But the question we keep asking is, are we doing the equivalent of investing in telephone poles in India? Do we have things in our portfolio that are just not going to be helpful for the future? So I've seen the tremendous work that you've done in what I would call democratizing access to capital, markets, marketing, procurement, even accounting. Last time I visited Hangzhou, you told me that your Alibaba clients can do their accounting online. So what do you think, Jack? You've now visited 7 countries in Africa. Can the Alibaba model of providing immediate access to cash to markets, can that work in places like Africa, other countries in South Asia? Because we're worried. We don't know that the traditional path of agriculture, light manufacturing, heavy industry, we don't know that path is open anymore.
Yeah, thank you. I think absolutely, internet is designed for developing countries. 19 years ago, when I started Alibaba, I think what we've said, we should focus on helping small companies. When the USA e-commerce focused on big companies. And the USA internet, that e-commerce company, they focus on cut the cost for the big companies. What we believe is that we should help small business to make money on the internet. Because don't teach customer how to cut the cost. They know better than you do. But helping small business to make the money, that is the key. So when we started, we found in China there's no internet, the connection, there's no payment, no logistics, and the small business cannot raise the money. So in the past 19 years, we said if there's no infrastructure of the marketplaces, so we should help small business to reach the market. A small business normally can sell only in their own town. How can we sell their products to the capital, to the other cities, to the other countries? Second is how we can help small business using internet to reach the money. So that is why we have the Alipay. How can we help a small business to reach logistics? They can deliver things quickly. So we help in building up a lot of logistic companies. And then how can we help small business to reach the training? So everything we do, we think by using internet to support small business. And when people say, China, know this, know that, I think because of know this, know that, that leaves entrepreneurs like us the opportunity. So if there's no logistic, we build a logistic. If there's no financing system, let's build a financing system. But don't think you will succeed next year. You have to prepare for 10 years. Today, Alibaba to this size, not because we built it last year. 19 years. We never forget that we serve for small business. We serve for the girls, women. We serve for helping them reach market. This is how. And we believe, one of the things, Jim, I was saying, the day when I started our business, 18 founders, me, and I talked to my 17 colleagues in my apartment. I say, guys, we don't have money, we don't have technology, we don't have any resources, any relationship. If Jack Ma and us, we can succeed, 70% of the people in the world, they can be successful. We have to prove that by working hard, believe in the future, believe in the vision, and day after day to improve ourselves, this thing works. So this is what I think in Africa, developing countries, that's the opportunity is. Believe the future, work day and night. That's what I think.
Jack, you told me,
Thank you.
you told me that there were some critical things that did exist. So for example, there were roads, there was a grid, there was the beginning of internet access. Then you built other things. I mean, I remember you told me the story that you helped farmers who otherwise would have left and gone to the cities, you helped them create transport companies. But sometimes they only transported the things for one part of the way and then they handed it off in another. So you created all these companies. But what were the critical things that were already in place that we should be thinking about now to build in, say, the poorest countries in Africa? What is it absolutely that you need for a platform-based economic growth to happen?
Yeah, I think there are about 3 things that I've been focusing on, right? The government first, try to convince the government. The most important, I go to so many countries, right? Especially I'm keen on developing countries because Europe, they don't like me, and America, they don't like us. Right. Europe, they love people talk about regulations.
Yeah.
They love to discuss about the worries. I know this thing, what are you going to do? And in America, of course, they have their system. But developing countries, they love to change. They have to change. And if what we made in China happen, I think today, I visited Africa. And people say, we don't have this, we don't have that, we cannot do this, not like China. I said, this is exactly what I heard in the past 19 years in China. Nobody believed that we would work it. So we say, if we never think we will be successful in 10 years. We think 10 years later, there will be somebody company succeed. If we give up, we have no chance. If we don't give up, we have chance. So every country I go, I try to convince the government. Very important, internet infrastructure. 30 years ago, if there is no electricity, this country is hopeless. This area is hopeless. Now, if there's no internet connection, this country will be hopeless because you are blocking your people reaching the information. The young people have no chance to compete. So internet connection is more important. But don't worry about the internet connection speed. 24 years ago, when I started internet business in China, it took me 3 hours and a half to download a half picture. Today, most of the countries have mobile phones. When I started internet, it's only on PC. There's no mobile phones. So today, most of the farmers, even in the developing countries, have the mobile phone. And mobile phone is much more powerful than 20 years ago. So internet is very important. Second, let's try to encourage the entrepreneurships. It's not the government make business happen. It's the entrepreneurs that make the business happen. It's the entrepreneurs that they have their ideas and dreams. So helping them, empower them. These are the 2. Of course, the third is education. But why I said internet is inclusive is for developing countries. I don't know if you know that. It takes 60 years. When electricity was invented, 60 years later, electricity happened in Kenya, Africa. It takes much longer time for the first technology revolution to go to the underdeveloped countries. Today, every 2 or 3 years, mobile phone, internet cover almost everywhere. Normally, all the credit card is designed for rich people. All the good things designed for rich people, powerful company. Today, internet is so cheap, poor people can use it. Mobile phone payment in China, more than 800 million people using mobile phone. Close to 300 million people in India using mobile phone. So this technology revolution is giving to the developing countries. If you believe it, you should work on it.
So Jack, we're going to take you very much at your word. So one of the things that we've tried to do is, if you wait till we build the grid like in China, it could take a long time. So we're focusing on renewable energy with much cheaper, better battery power.
Yes.
We just announced we're going to put $1 billion for battery technology, which could change everything. You didn't mention roads, though. The road network was important. I mean, in order to do the deliveries, you had to have roads, right?
Yep.
Would that be on your list?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Road, but this is something that I think there are hardware infrastructure and software infrastructure. Hardware infrastructure, road definitely it is. Internet infrastructure, mobile phone, and always in just transporting. But I'm focusing on software infrastructure, education, entrepreneurship, and e-government. Why I want to say e-government? Because if the government is not the electronic, government will never be smart enough. And if the government is E, then government will be transparent, no corruption, open, connect to everybody. So this is what we think. I'm pushing on that.
Yeah.
The road definitely is if you want to be rich, you have to have the road.
So Jack, you said something that you said two different things. One, you said it takes longer, and then the other thing you said is believe that it can happen. So it reminds me, what Bill Gates says all the time is everyone overestimates what they can do in 1 year and underestimates what they can do in 10 years. And you said almost exactly that. So if that's the case, what does it take to be a great entrepreneur, right? And let me just put in context, right? So you say, small business, you work so hard, but I see you doing things that just blew me away. Like, for example, when I visited and we were getting ready for Singles Day, right? And I asked you, why on earth did you do this? You created a holiday. It's like Mother's Day, right? Yeah. Hallmark Cards created Mother's Day. You guys created Singles Day. And you have to scale up so aggressively in order to be able to handle all that traffic. And then after you do that, then you have excess capacity.
Yep.
And you were doing things like predicting the winner of singing contests, right?
Yep.
Why? So how does that fit with the mindset of an entrepreneur? How are you trying to, what is it, because you're doing things that I've never seen anyone do before. How does that then translate? Because I know you're trying to teach others about entrepreneurship. What are you teaching them? What do the people here need to know about creating an entrepreneurial culture?
Yeah, an entrepreneur, first you should have your belief. When you have a belief, you have nothing to worry about. You don't fear. Right? If you don't have a belief, the VC said, if you do this, you're going to raise money. Then you're in trouble. So what you have to believe is what kind of value you bring to the customer. I'm a believer, and I go anywhere say this. The Wall Street don't like this, but I go to Wall Street. When I raise money, I said, customer number 1, employee number 2, shareholder number 3. And one of the shareholders said, if I had known, Jack, that shareholder number 3, I would not buy your stocks. I said, please sell it now. Because it's the customer that pay us. It's the employees that work hard, we work together. If the customer happy, employee happy, shareholder will be happy. So believing is very important. Second, you have a great team. So you have to have the thing that believing is IQ. And EQ is working as a team. So if you want to be successful, better to have EQ. When you have a high EQ, people love to work with you. But if you have a terrible IQ, you will lose quickly. Because you are so stupid, you don't know how to, right? But
You'll get along with each other, but you're so stupid you'll fail.
That's right, because a lot of people succeed because of luck. Believe it or not, a lot of people, because I think I'm lucky enough, for the past 20 years as a teacher, I work and make a lot of mistakes and change, improving, and correct mistakes. I survive. I don't think I'll be lucky enough because my IQ can never compare with my colleagues. They are much smarter. IQ can make you lose slowly. EQ can make you find good people working with the people. But if you want to be respected, if you want to have a big heart, you should have LQ, the Q of love. So these 3 Qs are very important. You should have the Q of love, care others. You should have the EQ, work with the others. You should have IQ. You know what you are doing. Based on that, and then giving times, things will happen.
So, Jack, you, earlier today you told me that, you know, the greatest soldiers are fearful. Entrepreneurs have no fear. What did you mean by that?
Well, entrepreneurs, we never fear. Generals, soldiers fear because there's a war they kill. Business is not about killing. Competition it's a fun part of the business. We say, entrepreneurs, we don't cry, we make our competitors cry. Right? It's wisdom. It's not about killing. If you try to killing all the competitors, you're a professional killer. You are not an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is that you improve by how can you make your better services by competition. And I think today politicians fear and a lot of people fear, right? That, as I said to the Director General of WTO, when you put 200 ministers in a one room, try to agree on something, it's almost impossible. But if you put the 200 business people in a one room, we can work out something. And we never fear because we can always work out something.
So how did you develop this fearlessness, Jack? I mean, when I first met you, you told me the story that when Kentucky Fried Chicken came to China, you really wanted to work there. And there were 24 applicants and 23 jobs, and you didn't get a job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. You applied to Harvard 10 times and were rejected each time applying to Harvard. So how did those experiences teach you about being an entrepreneur?
Well,
are they true stories, by the way?
Yeah, this is a true story. I applied a lot of jobs, all failed, and I tell myself, maybe I should do myself. As an entrepreneur, business people, you have to get used to be rejected. Why people should help you? People help you, that is very unusual. Right? Why people should help you? People don't help you, that is very usual. So as an entrepreneur, you have to get used to, well, you're rejected. As a salespeople, you go out, to sell something. You should tell yourself, today I go out to visit 10 customers, they will all say no, which is usual. So you came back with happy. If you sold one of them, you are extremely happy. You are better than you think. So this is optimistic. And when I started my business, people don't want to join my company. Because they say, internet. I've never heard about a company called there is a company doing internet. There's no even a word in a dictionary called internet. And the name Alibaba is so strange. Right? And this guy always failed, never even get a job. They want to put a... So I said, guys, I tell to their wife, their parents, their husband, people who joining my company, our company, I'm sure no policeman will knock our door because we'll do criminal things. I promise tax bureau will not come to our company because we try to sneak away. These are the things I promise everybody in the company and their family, that we will never do any criminal things, bad things to the society. And I will promise that everybody will have tough lives. I will never promise you will be rich, you will be successful, but if we work hard, something could happen. And this is what we did. And I'm telling even now, we have so many people join our company every year. If I got a chance, I tell them, it's not Jack Ma give you the opportunity, give you the job. It's you created the opportunity for yourself, for everybody. And nothing to fear, because we never thought about sneaking from tax. We never thought about doing illegal things. We never thought about, and we're not allowed to do that. What do you fear?
So Jack, I think it was in the summer of 2012. I'd just taken over. And you told me, and at that time, I think you had maybe 25,000 employees. And you said you had 30 true believers, the people that started out in your apartment. And you've always said that choosing the right people is the most important thing. Yeah. So how did you choose the 30 true believers? How did you know they were true believers? Did you turn them into true believers? And so generally speaking, how do you choose people? How do you know the right people to bring into your world?
Yeah, there's no best people in the world say you have to hire the best people. There's no best people. The best people is always in your company. You train them to become best. And I start to make a lot of mistakes when I raise my money. When you have money, you start to make mistakes. I think one day when I raised my first round of finance was $5 million. I hired a lot of vice president of multinational companies. One of the VP of marketing came to me. He gave me a proposal. He said, "Sir, this is our next year's marketing plan." I said, "Oh, $12 million. I only have $5 million. He said, "I've never done a business plan below $10 million. So I say, "All right, it's not his fault, it's my fault. It's a Boeing 747 engine. When you put into a tractor, the disaster comes." None of them are happy. So you have to hire the right people. So the people I choose, they have to be optimistic. Because as entrepreneur, if you're not optimistic, you're in trouble. You should have the good IQ at least. Right? If you're not a good IQ is important. And the next thing is that they're ready to learn. I hate to hire people who came as expert. Because there's no expert of future. There's always expert of yesterday. We are entering in the world. And we don't want people to join the company and say, "Jack, what do you want me to do?" I hate that. I say, "I don't want you to do anything. What you can do for us. This is more what you can do for you." This kind of people ready to learn, fearless for the future, believe in the future, and teamwork, smart enough. Giving them the time, they will come. And then we train them. Let them make mistakes.
So, Jack, you've started now working in Africa, and you're bringing Africans to Hangzhou and teaching them about entrepreneurship. Tell us about that. How's that going?
Yeah, I visited, thank you so much for keep on telling me I should go to Africa, right?
6 years.
6
Jack.
years.
6 years.
So since last year, I visited the first trip to Africa, because before I went to Africa, I had poor, disorder, all these things. When I visited Africa, I was amazed. Young, energetic, African people are fearless, right? Today, in the world full of fear, any country you go, people worry. But in Africa, young people say, "Yeah, we want to change, we want to do." And they are young and energetic. There are so many things. And the good thing is, not like China, we're polluted. They are so clean air. But people say, what can we do? So we think there's a great opportunity in Africa for the internet. Right? The internet infrastructure is bad, no logistic, no electronic payment. But the potential there, the mobile phone coverage is good, and the government want to change, young people want to change. So we decide to invite 1,000 entrepreneurs in next 5 years come to Hangzhou to 10 days training. We tell them what happened. We take them to the rural areas of China, how we help the farmers, how we make the logistics from zero, how we make the payment. After 10 days, these guys full of energy, they all rush back to the Africa. We are on the mobile phone every day. You see these people. They think, yes, now we know what should we do. We should learn from China, but never become China next year. Maybe 10, 15 years later, there will be a lot of Jack Ma's, a lot of Alibabas, a lot of Alipays in Africa. So I think this is I feel excited about. This is something I can do much better in my life, in the rest of my life, than be the chairman and CEO of Alibaba.
Well, let's talk about that. So you're retiring, and Jack and I were just meeting, and what I said to Jack was, "Jack, you can't get away from this, because we're now, if we're going to take the model that you built and extend it to the rest of the world, I don't want you going and doing kung fu and relaxing and off somewhere else. You have to engage." But then you told me, which was very encouraging, that this is now what you're going to do. You're going to engage. How is that going to work? So there's the 10 by 1,000 program. Our IFC team is working with you guys. We're very excited about it. How's that going to work? So over 10 years, I think, total, right? You said 5, but I heard 10. So maybe
10 is, we work with World Bank.
Yeah, total.
On the 10, 1,000. Next 10 years, every year, 1,000.
So how is that going to work? Because you're going to get them excited, that's for sure, right? But what if they go back and there's not the infrastructure or the things that are already, I mean, I'm sure we're going to provide financing, with all kinds of things that we'll do. How's that going to work? And how are we going to take that 10,000, the 10,000 people you'll train, and then begin to build the core of what could be the growth model for the future for Africa? How's that going to work?
Yeah. For every entrepreneur, we invited to China. The first lecture lesson I tell them is about, if everything is ready, you have no value. As entrepreneur, because things are not ready, that is why the society needs you. Because things are not ready, there's no this, no that. That is why we need entrepreneurships. So this is what I think. And next thing is I retire from the chairman position because to me it's not retire, it's a job rotation. I go back to education. I think education is more important than technology. Operating company like Alibaba, I'm a bit old. But doing education entrepreneur, I'm quite young. Next 30 years, human beings are facing huge challenge of technology, disruptive technology. A lot of people losing job. The way we teach our kids in the past 200 years are for the industrial period. Machine will do better. Machine will be smarter, calculate faster, remember everything, and they're never unhappy. They're very rational, do everything. So we have to teach our kids, change the education system, teach our kids do things the machine cannot do. Teach the kids that can do better than the machine do. So this is how we'll be focused on. For entrepreneurs, the same thing. Tell them life is never easy. Today is difficult, tomorrow is much more difficult, but the day after tomorrow is beautiful. Most people die tomorrow evening. And how can you survive today and tomorrow? That is the key. And we will never teach people how to be successful. Harvard, Yale teach people how to be successful. We want to share people what kind of mistakes we make. It's the mistakes, lessons we learn, we make progress. When people learn too much successful stories, they think they can successful easily. No, that's a wrong way. Teach people how to face the challenges. We teach people a lot of mistakes, failure, not because they will avoid it, because when the mistake, failure comes, how can they face it? How can they challenge this, crack this? This is how we think. So I think this is entrepreneur, that is education.
So they're holding up signs telling me we have to stop. But Jack, IQ, EQ, LQ. We learned that today. That optimism has to be a way of life. Right?
And curiosity is also important.
Curiosity is a way of life. Be fearless. Be humble in the face of the future, because there's no such thing as an expert of the future. In the internet, entrepreneurship education, you also told us about. So there's so many young people here, and not so young people, I see. But Jack, I watched you over 6 years. You were a phenomenon. I mean, a lot of people in China knew about you. My own IFC teams, we had invested in Alibaba early on. They wanted me to meet you. But now you're a global phenomenon. I do remember, though, we met in Davos one year, right after you went public. And you told me, oh, my life is miserable right now. Because you said, at the beginning, everyone said that Alibaba couldn't do anything. And it gave us energy. Now, everyone's saying that Alibaba can do everything. And it's a pain for me, right? But you've gone through all that now. What would you tell this group of people? What are the most important lessons that you've learned in this really extraordinary life you've led?
Yeah. Well, I think young people are the hope. So for me, if I want to keep my hope, I spend time on the young people. And every young people, I try to tell them life is not easy. I try to tell them that you come here not to work, but to enjoy yourself. You have to enjoy the work you're doing. You have to believe the things you're doing. You have to like the people you're working together. But the other thing is, ask everybody, whether young people, old people, ask us 3 questions. I keep on asking myself these 3 questions in the past 5 years. What do you have? What do you want? And what do you will give up? A lot of people don't ask, what do you want to give up? Oh, what do you have? Yes, I have nothing. And what do you want? You have a lot of things. And what will you give up? Always think about these questions. And then you will be fearless, you will be optimistic, you will know what you want. And this is when you're going on that, you will never sort of get lost.
Wow. Thank you, Jack. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Really great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jack Ma. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. What an inspiring discussion. I'm sure you'll agree with me, so much that we've learned from the conversation between Dr. Kim and Jack Ma. Now I would like to move on to the next part of the program, where we look more closely at this issue, both the challenges as well as the opportunities. We have a packed panel ahead for you today, so I would like to call up to the stage Minister Heng Swee Keat, the Finance Minister of Singapore, the Secretary of State for International Development and Minister for Women and Equalities of the United Kingdom, Penny Mordaunt, Mats Granrud, Director General of the GSMA, Nandan Nilekani, Co-founder and Non-Executive Chairman of Infosys, and Nicola Miahi, Co-founder and President of the Future Society. Please do make your way to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, panelists. Thank you. Everybody found your mics? Yeah, you got your mics? Okay, while everybody's getting settled, that was a really hard act to follow, I know, guys, but I'm sure we'll have lots of interesting pointers for you today. Although I've certainly taken away from that discussion between Dr. Kim and Jack Ma that I need to improve not just IQ, EQ, but LQ, something that we can all do with a little bit more of. I'd like to start the discussion this afternoon, once everyone is settled. Yeah, why don't we get underway? Secretary Mordaunt, lovely to have you on the panel. In the work that you do, you probably get to see more than most what works and what doesn't work in terms of technology in the world of development. How are you using digital technologies to change what the UK does in development work?
Thank you. We have always at DFID used technology, but this year in particular we've launched a new digital strategy because we think it is the margin of victory in everything that we do. We have a great track record from mobile money to solar energy kits to 3D printing in the field, all sorts of things, using drones increasingly. But we've really brought in initiatives that step this up. So tech call-outs, part of the grand challenge on hope in conflict. So this is finding new ways to protect people in conflict situations.
Excellent.
So how do we protect people who are under siege? How do we get food and water to them? It's very difficult to do airdrops and things like that. I'm fed up of going to the House of Commons and saying why we can't protect people or get medicine or get the power back on. So really looking at how technology can help us with those things. And we've also really tried to embed this in how the whole of our government works. So we've set up a humanitarian innovation hub, which brings together the best minds in technology, in defense, in civil contingencies to really develop these things. So it's absolutely central to what we do. We do it in every area that we work in, and we do work in every area. But I think in particular this year on the humanitarian side, because increasingly we have very vulnerable people in conflict situations, and we need the smartest minds applied to giving us some new things in our toolbox to protect those people.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that Jack Ma was saying earlier is that if governments use digital technologies, they become more transparent and then you have less corruption. And certainly, Minister, that's the model that Singapore has taken in terms of pushing ahead with digital technologies. I know you've been a big champion of that and Singapore's been quite successful. But what were the challenges that you faced in the early days when you did try and initiate digital platforms for the government, in particular in the finance sector?
Well, I think we have been fortunate in that we have started this a long time ago, and it helps that Singapore is a very small place, so it's not too difficult to get some of these things going. But at the same time, I think the big challenge is always to get consensus for making some of these changes and to have strong political commitment to this. We're very fortunate that our Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, he actually had a diploma in computer science.
Cool.
He finished his degree in 2 years instead of 3, so he spent extra year doing computer science. And he was one of the great advocates of this. And we started the National Computer Board some time ago, and he has been building up. The key really at the end of it is first and foremost building human capital. Because you need a group of people who can do the difficult programming. We need to be very open to working with people from around the world, and at the same time to make sure that the benefits of what we do is clear to people. So for instance, our tax department have been doing this computerization for a long time, and in fact it has evolved over many years. So one of the latest things which they have done is that we submit the total remuneration of public sector employees. There is a form which the department had to generate, and this form is sent electronically to our tax department. And the tax department, having had your previous record of how many children you have, how much you are allowed to claim, how much you donate to charity, and so on and so forth, would then compute the amount of taxes you have to pay,
Right.
and that is sent to us automatically. And all we have to do is to just pay, but if you dispute the amount, you could go to the tax department and get that. So I think that helps when people feel that there is a benefit, and if that keeps our cost of government low, and that provides very strong public support for what we do.
Right. But Nanda, in India, you know, this transition is just starting in a way, right? With the Aadhaar program, getting digital identification. I don't know how many people out there actually know what the Aadhaar program is and how much it's transformed lives in India, despite some recent challenges. But so maybe you could start by telling the audience what Aadhaar is.
Yeah, so, Aadhaar is really a program to give every Indian resident a digital ID. It was something the government had been planning for many years, and I joined the Indian government in 2009 after I retired from Infosys and led this project. And it has now reached almost everyone in the population. 1.2 billion people have the ID.
It's impressive.
And it's a digital ID for all residents. It's also linked to the banking system and enables you to link a bank account to the ID, and then you can get electronic transfers done. So India runs the world's largest cash transfer system where government sends money electronically into people's accounts. It's also an online ID which I can use for authentication. The system does about 1.2 billion authentications a month. And it's also the basis for opening a bank account or getting a mobile connection.
Right.
That is about 3.4 billion transactions. So fundamentally, we went from an era 10 years back where many people didn't have an ID, to where they have a modern digital ID which can be verified online.
So can you take this model and apply it to healthcare and education and other countries?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, you need some kind of a digital ID for any kind of online activity. So for example, the Indian government has rolled out a major health insurance scheme, Ayushman Bharat, some time back, and that program requires an ID which will ultimately be linked back to the Aadhaar ID. The World Bank has taken a big initiative, ID4D, and discussions are happening in 20 countries across the world because the need for digital ID has become absolutely super critical. And even the UN SDGs says legal identity for all is one of the goals. So I think having an ID has now become very, very important around the world, and there's tremendous interest in propagating this approach.
In replicating this approach. Matt, I'd like to bring you in at this point. You know, what we're hearing on this panel, both in private sector and the government being used in aid as well, you know, it's just the beginning, isn't it, in terms of the transition and our dependence on technology. With the Internet of Things now, you know, it's moving all so fast. How can we use this technology, or how can companies get ready for a future that we don't even know what it looks like?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I'm not sure I can answer it, but I think light touch from a regulatory perspective is absolutely needed, because it's impossible to sit here and try to think out what's going to happen in the future. If you just go back 20 years, only 3% or 4% of the world's population had a mobile phone. And today, more than 2/3 of everyone has a mobile phone. It's a pretty amazing growth. And half of the world's population, 3.3 billion, are accessing internet on this mobile device. So we still have 50% to cover. And at the same time, we are just on the cusp of a new era, which we call the 5G era, or the intelligent connectivity era. And what is intelligent connectivity? Well, it's really the multiplication between ultra-high speed 5G. It can of course be 4G as well, but really high-speed capabilities that 5G will give us. And 5G is being launched this month and will be rolled out throughout the world in the next coming years. Couple that with AI, which is the intelligence bit, AI and big data, and we all of a sudden have an awesome power, an awesome tool to reach the unconnected and to change the game in a way. So to answer your questions, I would say that light touch regulations and be extraordinarily nimble in trying to figure out the next generation.
Okay, you know, fair point. But Nicola, I'd like to bring you in at this point. What we're talking about here really is how we maximize these technologies that Matt just mentioned and get them to the people that need them the most, the 50% who don't have access to this yet, right? So what's the best way to use digital platforms to achieve the goals of getting technology to the people who are left out of all of this?
Well, I think one of the key words, and it should not be left empty, is obviously public-private partnerships. And the empty word in that is oftentimes partnership. It can mean everything and nothing. But it's really about finding, experimenting, and scaling the right way. And let me attempt this, a wise way, meaning smart on the short term, but also understanding the long-term footprint of these partnerships. One of the issues of the platform economy is that they involve by design an amazing concentration of wealth and power. There is no free lunch. If we want to deliver an accelerated digital development through the concept of digital platforms, we will have to go through concentration of wealth and power. Is it bad? Not necessarily. What we need to engineer is the right balance, balancing the pendulum between letting the private sector go and make it happen, like Jack Ma, like Nandan did, and then finding the right way to rebalance so that in the age of AI, the industrial value chain leaves space for the SMEs. Between now and 2030, France or Germany have to engineer the transition of over 30% of the working age population into new forms of work. In India or China, it's only 15%. It would be dangerous for India and China, for example, and other emerging economies to think that they can kick the can down the road. Why? Because at the time of an acceleration of digital economy, you really don't want to be left behind. And that capability building in terms of engineering the right governance, the right reskilling, upskilling, takes time. So now is not the time to be left behind, to work out these right PPPs.
Yeah, you know, I want to bring the point to the Secretary to find out, given the fact that regulation, actually this is for the three of you in a way, that given the point that regulation is meant to be a sort of light touch to allow these technologies to grow so that, you know, companies, the private sector can go ahead, build the digital platforms, how are your countries addressing those regulatory issues? Perhaps, Secretary, you could start.
I think this is a huge challenge, not just in this sector, but other sectors. How do we move at the speed that we need to have that enabling regulation? And I think that we have to look at our own legislation. We have to look at how we operate in government. I think the way we are set up has been for a different era, and so we have to constantly be able to move at that speed. But it is one of the huge challenges, and it's not just in digital tech. It's in every area of
Absolutely.
scientific discovery, medical discovery. So I think we also need to adapt the way we do these things.
Yeah, given the point that you make that we were set up for a different era, absolutely, that's really important. Countries are still transitioning to this new digital future. So, Minister, what's Singapore's experience been on the regulatory side?
Well, I think earlier on Jack mentioned about regulations and how we should allow entrepreneurs to really have a lot more free play, and I think that's a very critical point. It is very easy for us to over-regulate, and I will say that the golden rule about regulation is first do no harm, to make sure that we step out of the way. And technology is developing so quickly that it's not possible for us to know everything. So what we are trying to do is a number of things. One is, for instance, our monetary authority is having this sandbox, regulatory sandbox, where within the confines of those activities, the companies are free to experiment with it. And in the process, both the companies as well as the regulator learn a lot more about how best to regulate and what not to regulate. And it is not easy because we do make mistakes. Things are developing quickly, and therefore we have to be quite fast and adaptable and be nimble in making those changes.
Right.
But at the same time, I would say that the role of government is not just about regulation, because I think government as an enabler, as a promoter of this, is going to be quite critical. And first big thing is really about, you mentioned about jobs, and jobs is going to be quite critical. We can't change, we got to re-skill our people quite significantly, and that is going to take time. But the way to start is to start now, because if you wait until everything, it might be too late. So lots of things that government need to do, and of course government need to think about regulations that promote inclusion, and also to ensure that we have a level playing field. You don't want a big incumbent to then stifle everybody and all the SMEs cannot grow. So how do we have a regulatory framework that allows for growth, innovation, but at the same time creates a level playing field, and that we do not end up just doing good things in the short run, but in the long run it comes to haunt us. So thinking about what needs to be done at different stages, but yet not presuming that we know everything, and being prepared to change as situation evolve will be quite critical. And of course, the other very important thing which I hope government would do is to ensure that we also put enough resources in the research and development agenda.
Being nimble and also spending the investment, putting the investment in R&D, I think that's key. And then what's the experience in India been with regards to this?
No, I think one is, of course, you need regulation to allow innovation and competition to flourish. But also, I think it's important to recognize that if we really want digital platforms and innovation to happen, that we need to create a class of digital public goods. And if you go back and look at the history of both the internet and the GPS, were actually public goods created by the US government. And if we are talking to Matt, the whole GSM phenomenon happened because all the European countries came up with one standard.
Right.
So there's a huge role for standards and so on. And we believe in India, and that's both the governments have done that, is digital identity, digital payments, digital signatures, data empowerment should all be public goods. And we need to create a new class of institutions like we did with Aadhaar. And that's as much required because, see, data is going to be the most important thing.
Yeah.
And data has a habit of concentrating very quickly. And if you don't do anything about it, it'll end up with a few companies or with the government. But the true power of data is when individuals can use their own data to improve their lives, to get a loan, to get better healthcare, to get better education. And therefore, inverting data to be empowering to people requires hard thinking about institutions, about technology, and about regulations. So I think it's not just about letting go and saying, let some guy build it.
Yeah.
I think it's also about creating the institutional framework and the technology to empower people to use all these technologies.
But data in itself is such a sensitive issue, right? Like even in India with the Aadhaar, the Supreme Court ruled in the favor, but it has now regulated or put out some conditions about how to regulate data.
I think they've put on a framework under the fundamental right to privacy and so on. But I think that's not just what I'm talking about. I think it's about how, you think about this. If our challenge is development in the developing countries, individuals in developing countries are going to be data rich before they're economically well off.
Goodness.
Because the person having a smartphone is going to generate as much of a digital stream as someone in the US or London having a smartphone. And if people are therefore going to be digitally rich before they're economically well off, then can we empower them to use their data and get better loans, better healthcare, better education, better jobs? And this fundamental inversion of data in the hands of people, a form of data democracy, cannot be done by itself. It has to be done by government action.
But the current status quo, Nicola, on the point that Nandan just made is that currently we have these mammoth data collecting companies, right? These giants, technology giants all over the world. They dominate the landscape. So how do we get from where we are now to having more data being controlled, not just in the hands of smaller players, but individuals?
Well, that's a typical case of the need to rebalance the pendulum towards the people, be they citizens, be they users of services, be they consumers of services, or even be they taxpayers. And one way to do that, to create the foundations of a data empowerment process, in my view, in that case, comes from Europe. GDPR, and within GDPR, what we call data portability, is the precursor to the following situation. I'm in Indonesia, I'm a startupper. I've created a very interesting machine learning algorithm, which we know, because it's a deep neural net, requires throws of stocks and flows of data to percolate into productivity. I don't have this data. With data portability, I can forge an alliance with my consumers so that they go to the various platforms, Uber, Facebook, and they mandate that the platforms route the data to me so that I can run them through my own algorithm and therefore create value. That's a typical way through which we are lowering down the barriers of entry into the data/AI economy, and that's very important. That's not sufficient, because once this is in place, and GDPR is in place, but it's not applied, not implemented yet. What GDPR mandates Europeans to do, and I think that a lot of emerging economies can borrow from that, is to invent an API economy. In tandem with the platform, it should not be built against the platforms, because they have the data, they have the expertise. It has to be, again, a public, private, but in this case, people partnership. I think that's one way forward. It's not the only way, and it should not be, I would say, resulting from a conflict. There is really a very nice partnership to be built here. Otherwise, the data portability might become a void term, because who owns the data right now is big corporations, and it's going to be very difficult to take these things by force. You know, we can use stick, but carrot is very efficient here too.
Right. Matt, you know, in terms of how the mobile industry as a body is using big data projects or pushing ahead with big data projects to achieve some of the sustainable development goals, how is it doing that? Or, you know, which areas is it focusing on the most?
Well, I sort of share exactly what you said on data. It is the new oil. It is data rich, as Nandan said, which is absolutely true. And it is a precious commodity, a commodity that I believe belongs to me. So if I would like then to move from one carrier to another carrier, I should theoretically be able to move that data with me. And I would be able to see who is mining my data, and I should be able to govern who is mining it and maybe capitalize on that, because I am actually producing that data. So in the world of mobile operators and big data, we do a lot of different activities, possibly sometimes linked to IoT with sensors, but also making analysis on people movements. Telenor is working in Bangladesh and other countries to see the movements of multi-drug resistant malaria, for instance. In India, tuberculosis and Bharti Airtel is looking at people movement again to see and track the origin of it. Telefonica in Brazil are using IoT then to detect air pollution problems. And we can now do that up to 2 days before the pollution happens, and sort of be able to...
Wish we could do that with earthquakes.
Yeah, to be able to warn the public that this is going to happen. So overlaying one technology with another technology, that's when it becomes interesting. But it's really, really important that we have this discussion, because anonymized data must be safeguarded. We need to safeguard the integrity of me. And I think that debate needs to continue to run.
Right. You know, at the heart of what we're talking about here, though, this sort of distant, maybe not too distant future, but it's trying to get these digital platforms to to be accessed by the people who are currently being left out. You know, and Secretary, in your work, I'm sure you must see this all the time, and the statistics bear through as well, that women in many countries, it's really women who are being left out of this new digital future. How do we address this?
So you've done some spectacular work. Sorry. Some really good data has been produced on this, and it is another barrier that women face. I think there's a number of things we can do. I mean, we concentrate on economic empowerment for women through the work we do on jobs and livelihoods, really trying to get them access to particular education and particular opportunities. But I think it's not just in terms of their economic empowerment why we really need to connect them. I mean, a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment on modern slavery and stopping trafficking, there are very simple technological solutions out there that could protect people, stop or send a flag out when something bad happens to them. And also a lot of the work that we're doing to really change things for women in certain parts of the world. I mean, for example, the Africa-led movement to end FGM, the new opportunities that we have through social media platforms to tackle is completely game-changing in what we're trying to do. So it is absolutely vital, but we've just got to make sure that this is another thing that is included on the education work we're doing, on the economic development work we're doing, and that it's really recognized with the partners that we work with, that they need to be addressing this situation.
Right. Minister, in Singapore, you know, when you look at the example, or the experiences rather, I should say, that Singapore has had, even when you look at the digital platform creation, I think it would be fair to say it's the private sector, in many ways, that's led the way. But you know, as many have pointed out on the panel, for this to be really effective, the government has to also lead the way in terms not just of innovation, but job creation as well. So what do you think governments should do to improve their offer to the people?
Well, there are a number of things. I think if we look at our own journey, we started off with more G2G type of platform. Because in the earlier phases, just getting departments within government to work together with one another was difficult enough. And so creating that builds a sense of confidence among the government departments that this is a very useful tool. Now, then the next stage was to do a G2B and G2P, government to business and government to people. And in doing that, you find that the transactions between the government and businesses, government and people became a lot better, a lot easier. And that again helps to build confidence for the system. Now we are moving on to the next stage, which is allowing the government system to be a kind of a backbone infrastructure for us to catalyze B2B and P2P transaction between businesses to businesses and between people to people. So just two examples. One is an example of the digital payment system. With a mobile phone, you could pay, and it can be used for a number of purposes, and that you go out for a meal with friends, and you could kind of pay using the digital phone. And at the same time, among businesses, how we could allow for that transaction. Now we are in another example is that many years ago we built this national trade platform, and the idea is that it is more for businesses to transact with government departments, because when importers and exporters need to send something, normally they'll require approval from various regulatory authorities. So allowing that allows a one-stop shop for us to approve a permit for import or export, very, very quickly. Now we are building that to allow for transactions with banks, with financiers, with importers and exporters, so that it has become a B2B framework to allow for businesses to just finance trade and so on. And we are in the phase of working together with our partners to do a country-to-country type, because trade is cross-border. Wow. And if we can do that, we're in fact starting with some experiments with some partners who are keen to do this, so that even before the goods arrive in the country, we could get the permit all declared with the customs department, and will allow for that transaction to be done quickly. So I think a step-by-step process of building confidence in the system and working together with partners will be quite critical. And in that regard, I thought the World Bank's project of your BBB, the Build, Boost and Bolster is an excellent initiative. And we're working together with our fellow members of ASEAN to work on these various initiatives, including the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network, in order that more cross-border things can be done and we can share knowledge with one another.
So you're basically looking at a future where it's not just governments offering these digital platforms to their citizens, it's countries using digital platforms to trade with one another at an international level.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think there will be many, many interesting initiatives that would sprout, because as we hear from our entrepreneurs, Jack and Nandan, there will be lots of good ideas, and what we want to do is to try and facilitate that. And I think the World Bank and all other bodies can help to build this knowledge base and build platforms for us to share and learn from one another and explore opportunities for this partnership.
Nandan, from India's experience, right? Now you've got the Aadhaar system, and then the future that has just been painted for us by the minister. How far away are we from that, and what do you need to do to get to that kind of situation?
Well, I think what India has done over the last decade is build a number of systems. Aadhaar is one of them,
yeah.
and a billion people. Then it's built a very advanced interoperable payment system called UPI, which is now becoming the fastest growing payment system, any bank account to any bank account, any mobile phone. It's a very, very versatile system. It's built the platform for GST, and today India went from having 30 states, each having their own tax system, to one central online tax system with 11 million businesses, which the current government has successfully implemented. And now 11 million companies are paying taxes by filing returns online in one shot. And then we have, in India, also put in a national system for electronic tolling, again using RFID tags. So I think it's all examples which I think are very important in this topic, which is how do countries that are developing, which don't have legacy, can, because they have a greenfield situation, how can they use modern technology and leapfrog on development? And that's really the mission that is there. Even the new health system is coming up as something called the National Health Stack, which is what should be the architecture of the future for health records. So I think what you're seeing is a general application of population scale design and leapfrogging on technology.
And how, in terms of the 11 million companies that are now filing online, was there resistance, or was there a sort of education process that you needed to put them through?
No, I think that was an example of political will. I think the government and all the states together did that. And so you can think about it, that there were 30 states, different systems. One system, everybody files online, and tax computation is automated, it's based on what you file. And now the other byproduct of this will be that every company will have digital records of its business on this system, which then they can offer to a lender to get a business loan.
That's fantastic.
And that's the whole idea of empowerment, that once your data is available to you at your fingertips in real time, and you can get that and give it to somebody else to take some decision, then you have great choice. For example, in healthcare, I should be able to get my health records, my lab record from the lab system, my ECG record from the heart system, and give that to a specialist, and then he can make a judgment about what's wrong with me. So I think this whole notion that data has to be in people's hands, I think is a very important strategic point, which I think is very important in this discussion. We are going to have innovation platforms for countries to leapfrog.
Okay, on the point of data being in people's hands, as we have pointed out in this discussion, that's currently not the case, right, Nicola? I mean, who should effectively control the data? How do we get it to the point where it is in people's hands?
Well, you're putting your finger onto something very important, which is that increasingly we're differentiating the question of ownership from the question of control, from the question of access. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that no one has right now, except in the case of the Europeans and other countries, but with the general data protection regulation, we are mandating in Europe who owns, who controls, and how we should have access. Around this differentiation of notions, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for innovation for emerging economies, from developing economies, to adapt to their own situations what needs to be done. And that case of data governance towards algorithmic governance is a case where, in my view, the bank has not only a responsibility, but a key role to play to take countries to the next level by doing what the bank knows what to do, which is to bundle up solutions and launch with technical assistance and come up with the next policy playbook to take these countries to the next level. I think we talk a lot about leapfrogging technology. I would like us to talk a little bit more about leapfrogging governance, which in many cases, like Minister Hanks says, involve not regulating. We talk a lot about should we or should we not regulate. I would add one aspect, when to regulate. Central bankers discovered a long time back a tool besides regulatory sandboxes. The tool is forward guidance, which is that I'm not going to regulate today, but I'm going to tell you where we're going and what you should expect tomorrow.
What India did.
This regulatory toolbox is very important. That's something that the bank can develop, that countries should accumulate, because indeed, like Jack Ma said, there is no expert for the future. The future is something that we build, but moving from a situation of not knowing what the economic landscape is to a situation better knowing what these value chains are allows to adapt regulation, to adapt governance. It needs to be really agile, and we need to invent this agile governance of the 21st century. Not easy, but very important.
Matt, I want to bring you in on this agile governance for the 21st century. You mentioned right at the very beginning that nimble regulation is what is necessary. Is that how you see governments currently approaching this?
Unfortunately not. No, I think future guidance, that sounds like super, if we can get into that world. Now I see, unfortunately, rather the opposite, that we are trying to adjust an analog regulation system into this new digital world, and it plainly doesn't fit.
Right.
So many times it's actually better to just scrap the old stuff and start over with, you know, a future guidance, and maybe be very observant of regulatory bottlenecks that might occur, and if that occur, be pretty quick in regulating it. Because I do think that regulation is key to have in a complex industry as ours, or the ICT industry in general. But I do think it's literally impossible to sit today and try to figure out what will the world look like in 2022 and try to come up with a smart regulation. I think that is almost inhuman.
Yeah, and it seems like an exercise almost in futility, because you have no idea how to prepare for this, rather go through the transition. We've talked a lot about the data and trying to get the access of data into the individual ownership. But in order for any of this to take place, you need the hardware. You actually need people to have access to get connected, right? And Secretary, this is the point I'd like to ask you. In your work, you must be seeing this problem on a daily basis in terms of the lack of access to rural communities, with billions still with no access to the internet. How can we try and change this? What sorts of steps do you think we need to take?
Well, I think that this is a key area where we can really help, and what we've tended to do in the past is actually step in and put infrastructure in. But I think there's that we, because of the scale of the challenge, we need to look at doing things in a different way. And one thing that we can do as a development department is to prove the market. We can help demonstrate to the private sector why they should step in, why they should invest, and why it's in their interest to do so. And I think this is really important as well for donor nations. Cyber threats, but also markets for our own businesses as well. So we're setting up across the globe tech hubs to really be a sort of a focal point and to really help businesses that want to invest either in developing nations or British businesses as well. But part of this is also about really security, global cyber security. So I think there are many things that provide a sort of synergy to really encourage donor nations to step in, but we also need to be generating the information to demonstrate to the private sector why it's in their advantage as well to really step in and do more. Tell me a bit more about these tech hubs. Which parts of the world are you setting them up in? So we're we're in every part of the world. So this is actually an initiative that's a joint initiative between my department, our Foreign Office, and our Culture and Media and Sport and Digital department. And we have to make these things more sustainable. It's in our interest to do that, but it's, I think, one way that we can really support businesses to do the right thing. And I think that really, particularly over the last 12 months, I've noticed a real step change in how the private sector is now getting interested in the global goals more than ever before, and really seeing that it is the smart thing to do. And so now's the moment, I think, to really make sure that all the obstacles that have been there in the past to them actually doing things, whether it's business integrity, whether it's information, support actually there in country, is there. And we're also making the case and giving them good evidence as to why it's worth them being there and why it's worth them investing.
Excellent. Well, Minister, you know, Singapore is a unique case in all of this because you got to start from scratch, right? And at the very beginning or quite early on. What are some of the lessons, do you think, that other countries could take from the way that Singapore, I know that it's a much smaller country and, you know, smaller population, but in terms of the hardware that you put in to ensure access to connectivity for people?
Well, I think in terms of the hardware, we started within the government, and thereafter we started with the transaction. And what happened is that as the cost of computers came down, and in fact it's still coming down, we find that more and more households have access to it. And we do have programs to ensure that, you know, we have that inclusion. So that helps a lot. But I would say that it goes beyond hardware. I think a lot of it is really building the public consensus that this is the right thing to do. Because without the public support, and if the public is fearful of the technology or they don't see the benefit of that technology, they themselves will not invest in it. And also working together with the private sector, because how do we enable the private sector to do what it can do best, and then confining the role of government to what we can do better. You know? And that partnership is quite critical.
It's quite tricky as well. Yeah, Nandan, in India's case, you know, where do you see the opportunities for the private sector to step in and work with the government, the way that the minister has said, with regards to providing access to connectivity?
No, I think India is a great case of where the private sector has played a huge role in connectivity. I mean, you know, 15 years back, we had 60 million landlines and 0 cell phones, and now we have 60 million landlines and 60 million landlines and 1 billion cell phones.
Yes.
And I think the credit goes to the private sector. It's been companies who have led, like you know, Airtel and Idea and Vodafone, and now of course Mr. Ambani with Reliance Jio. So I think there's a very competitive infrastructure, and today we have the lowest prices for voice, the lowest prices for data, and ubiquitous connectivity. So I think it's a great success story in getting massive inclusion. And I think what the mobile industry did in India, which is actually shown the way, is the key to inclusion is high volume, low cost, small transaction amounts. Because if you have high volume, then you can reach 1 billion people. If you have low cost, you make it affordable. And if the transaction value is small, then people can buy in small sachets. And that is the heart of inclusion. So I think high volume, low cost, low transaction value has been demonstrated, and now we need to apply that to every other sector to really get inclusion going.
And is this a model that you think can be transplanted, used in other developing countries?
Oh, absolutely. I think the whole idea of technology is to make scarce resources affordable and accessible. And you can do that today in, not just in mobiles, but you can do it in health, you can do it in education. So I think, but that requires reimagining how you deliver these development services in a very different paradigm.
Yeah, what else do you need to be able to deliver these services in a country like India, for instance?
Well, I think you need to, you know, for example, if you need to make education accessible to all. So you have to make content accessible to all. It should be on a smartphone. It should be available anywhere. You should have a health capability where a person at the edge of the network get access to all the expertise on the cloud so that they can deliver better health care. So it requires a very different way of thinking about this. And I think that's the way that developing countries can offer, because you will never have enough doctors and enough teachers in these countries. We have to rethink the way we deliver it.
What you're pinpointing here, I think, is the way we need to change our education system in many ways, right? I mean, it's what Jack Ma was saying.
No, I think that's I think that's a bigger issue, because I think what we know is that it's no longer about going to college, getting a degree, and then working. It's about continuous lifetime learning. And because the pace of technology, we cannot predict which jobs will exist and which ones will become obsolete. We have to be prepared to learn all the time.
Right.
So all of us have to be constant learning people for all our lives as we work. And therefore, your educational infrastructure must provide just in time, anywhere, in little modules, on the cloud, in the evenings, whatever.
At all times.
At all times. So I think the whole way we deliver education also has to be changed.
Yeah, so obviously, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Now, I was just going to add to what Nandan said, which is that I think what is happening in India, in China, I was talking to our colleagues in Indonesia on the way in which e-transactions is taking place. I think it's all very, very inspiring because with the scale and the cost, you can really drive things and drive adoption in a very major way. And this is the network effect is tremendous. Now, at the same time, if I compare tiny Singapore with India, we do not have the same benefit of their scale. And I would say that most countries do not have a billion population. That no country other than China and India have the billion population. But what we can do is, I think, working together. Your point about how widespread adoption would drive down costs and allow all of us to benefit from it is very important. And therefore, for those of us without the scale, I think creating a whole network amongst the rest of us and riding on a network that, say, India, China, Indonesia have, is actually extremely useful.
Absolutely.
And I would just make one other point about education. I used to be education minister for almost 5 years. And when I was education minister, one of the hottest topic in Silicon Valley was educational technology. And they say, so I went to take a look together with some of our teachers. And at the end of it, I asked our teachers, I said, what do you think of this system? They said, we don't quite like it. I said, why? They said, because they are trying to replace the teacher. Because they think that the teacher is dispensable. But education is a lot more complicated than that. It's not about, head knowledge. It is about also building the human character and that requires a human being to do it. And we thought we should be able to learn how to use technology well together with the human quality. And I said, what would you suggest we do? He said, we should use technology to empower our teachers, to enable our teachers to do a better job and not to displace our teachers.
Right.
So I found that to be very inspiring. And in fact, we then ended up building a system in the Ministry of Education to precisely do that. And I hope that in the debate about jobs versus machine, that we see machines as enabling, as empowering, and not be fearful of it. And you will augment and enhance human capability to a far bigger extent than is possible working manually.
That we envisage. We've come to the last few minutes of the panel discussion, and for this, as I've mentioned to you already, this is the rapid fire round where you guys each have about a minute to tell us your final thoughts on this issue. Nicholas, I'll start with you.
Well, I think we also need to shift the focus in developing economies away from the quest for unicorns into the quest for multicorns. Unicorns is a tale of a concentration of wealth and power, which we need to have, okay. But when WhatsApp got taken over for 23 billion with 50 employees, I think that we can do a better job of accelerating innovation, which requires concentration, and at the same time making sure that we can deliver a more harmonious value chain. I think that this is important, particularly for emerging and developing economies.
Matt?
So I think the mobile industry, we were the first industry as a whole almost 3 years ago to commit to the SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And why did we do that? Well, we have this phenomenal muscle, but still we're only connecting to internet half of the world's population. So our vision is to intelligent connect everyone and everything to a better future. And how do we do that? Well, we have two different gaps. One is the coverage gap, so we need to continue to build out the mobile networks. But the bigger gap is the usage gap. And what is that then? Well, it's skills. We are committed to continue to drive skills so people know how to use the handset, the phone. I think that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Number two is the affordability, where we need help from the public side with spectrum prices, taxation, but also for our own sake. We need to lower prices as much as humanly possible. And thirdly, which is back to what you said on the public-private partnership, that is that the lack of relevant local content is what is the biggest barrier for people actually to go online. I know how to use my phone, I have enough money, but there's just simply nothing there for me. And we need to fix that. And the industry, the mobile industry, with partners, are committed to try to fix that. With partners such as Diffit, for instance, who is a phenomenal skilled donor that is pushing us every day to do better work.
Go ahead.
So why do we invest so much in this? We're investing in some new tech innovation partnerships in Africa in particular, and we also have some education tech innovation hubs as well. And to do so, it's the entire margin of victory to deliver the global goals. But also there are always unintended upsides back into donor nations as well. So I'll just give you one example, continuing my colleague's education theme. To deliver the global goals on education, we are 60 million teachers short. So EdTech is absolutely critical to that. Some of the partners we're privileged to work with are doing such a good job in getting learning outcomes to improve in developing nations that we are starting to use the same technology in our own schools. So this is a win-win for everyone, and we encourage people to lean in and do more.
Excellent.
Well, I think it's a very exciting future because it holds many promises. And what we need to do is to unlock that possibilities. And there I think the partnership is going to be very important for the private sector, for the entrepreneurs, to allow them, and for people in general, and even our young students, to empower them to think and imagine a better future. And then two, the government has an important role to make sure that we educate our people well. We set up an enabling framework for this to happen. And at the same time, the governments, as well as the private sector and the people sector, should all work to partner with one another, because the more we can do it together, the more we can drive the kind of scale that Nandan mentioned, and that we should share and learn from one another all the time. Yeah. Thank you.
Nandan?
I think the biggest benefit of development and technology will be if we're able to deal with data in the right way. And we have to take data beyond accumulations by companies and countries, but to data to empower each and every individual. And to do that, you have to think very holistically, because it's a combination of laws, regulation, institutions, incentives, and technology. And if you rethink that and really create a data empowerment architecture where everyone is empowered, I think that will give you the holy grail of development with technology.
Nandan, Minister, Secretary Matt and Nicholas, thank you so much. That was a really scintillating discussion. I learned a great deal, and thank you so much to the audience as well. Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure. It's good to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Minister. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Didn't get to see you earlier, so thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Take it. Thank you. Sir, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt.
Baik pemirsa KMNQ Korbu TV, itu dia baru saja kita saksikan bersama Disrupting Development, How Digital Platforms and Innovations Are Changing the Future of Developing Nations seminar. Menarik sekali apa yang kita saksikan tadi, bagaimana pembicaraan antara Presiden Kim dan juga Jack Ma yang begitu menginspirasi dan memberikan sebuah pembelajaran untuk kita semua. Terutama bagaimana Jack Ma menceritakan perjuangannya dalam mendirikan dan membesarkan, membuat Alibaba menjadi sebuah perusahaan e-commerce terbesar saat ini. Dan Disrupting Development, How Digital Platforms and Innovation Are Changing the Future of Developing Nations seminar tadi menjadi sajian terakhir kami hari ini. Namun pemirsa KMNQ Korbu TV, walaupun besok hari Sabtu, namun kami akan tetap menyapa Anda semua untuk menayangkan event-event pilihan dari annual meeting saya FM World Bank Group 2018 hari yang ke-6. Sambil bersantai di rumah atau ngopi-ngopi di hari libur besok, Anda akan kami sajikan 4 event pilihan yang akan dimulai pada pukul 9.30 waktu Indonesia Tengah. Yang pertama adalah The Economics of the Belt and Road Initiative, yang dilanjutkan dengan Innovation Exchange Education, How Can New Technologies Disrupt Education. Berikutnya juga akan ada diskusi dengan tema Debt Challenges Ahead dan diakhiri oleh penayangan Event Development Committee Meeting. Tentunya masih dengan tokoh-tokoh ekonomi dunia yang akan menjadi pembicara seperti Jim Yong Kim, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Zhao Jiei, Danny Lebziger, dan masih banyak lagi. Kami mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Anda semua pemirsa setia Kemenq Corpo TV yang telah menyaksikan live streaming Annual Meetings IMF World Bank Group 2018 hari yang kelima ini. Dan bagi Anda yang ingin menyaksikan kembali event-event pilihan yang ditayangkan sebelumnya, silahkan mengunjungi akun YouTube kami di BPPK Kemenq RI. Sekali lagi, akun YouTube kami di BPPK Kemenq RI. Saya Dudi Septariza, mewakili tim yang bertugas undur diri. Sampai jumpa di hari ke-6 besok. Selamat sore. Dan wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.